Dear viewers of the Tom Photo channel, today we are exploring aperture and f-stop. We'll go over what these terms mean, how they're calculated, and dive into some interesting details like extreme lenses, aperture blade effects, and the f-stop sequence. First, let's talk about aperture. Aperture is the opening inside your lens that lets light into your camera. Think of it like the pupil of your eye, adjusting based on the amount of light in your environment. A larger aperture lets in more light, while a smaller one reduces the light. Aperture size is measured in f-stops, represented by numbers like f1.4, f2, or f16. This system was introduced already in the 1880s. The f-stop numbers aren't just arbitrary. They're based on the focal length of your lens and the size of the aperture opening. F-stop is calculated by dividing the focal length by the aperture diameter. For instance, if you're using a 50mm lens with an aperture opening of 25mm, then your f-stop is 50/25, which is 2. f2 means the aperture is relatively wide, allowing more light to reach the sensor. Now, let's talk about the f-stop sequence. You might recognize these numbers: f1.4, f2, f2.8, f4, f5.6, f8, f11, f16, and so on. But why are these numbers arranged this way? Here's the reason. Each step in this sequence changes the aperture by a factor of the square root of 2, or approximately 1.4. Since the area of a circle is proportional to the square of its diameter, using the square root of 2 allows each step in the f-stop sequence to double or halve the amount of light entering the camera. In simpler terms, going from one f-stop to the next higher number lets in half as much light. Understanding the f-stop sequence is crucial because it lets you precisely control your exposure and depth of field. For example, a lower f-stop number like f1.4 gives you a wide aperture, meaning more light, shallower depth of field, and a soft autofocus background, perfect for portraits. A higher f-stop like f16 results in a narrow aperture, less light, and a sharp background and foreground, ideal for landscape shots. You might notice most lenses don't go beyond certain f-stops. Lenses rarely go below f0.7 because of optical limits. For instance, the Zeiss Planar 50mm f0.7 lens, famously used by Stanley Kubrick in Barry Lyndon, can achieve an astonishing f0.7, but only a handful of lenses ever reach this. The Leica Noctilux M 50mm f0.95 is one of the fastest lenses available today, at f0.95. On the opposite end, you don't typically see f-stops beyond f64. This is because as the aperture narrows, a phenomenon called diffraction occurs, where light waves spread out and cause a loss in sharpness. This effect makes images softer rather than sharper, so lenses usually stop at f64. For most photography, the range of f1.4 to f16 is enough. And anything beyond f64 is really only used in specific scientific photography situations. Next, let's look at aperture blades, the parts inside the lens that open and close to adjust the aperture size. The number and shape of these blades play a huge role in the look of your photos, especially in autofocus areas, or what's known as bokeh. Modern lenses usually have between 7 and 11 aperture blades. A higher number of blades, especially rounded ones, give a smoother, more circular bokeh effect, which many photographers love for portraits. Lenses with fewer straight-edged blades can create bokeh that appears more geometric, which can be an artistic choice as well. Here's a fun fact. The number of aperture blades also affects the starburst effect, the rays that appear around bright points of light when using narrow apertures like f16 or f22. Lenses with an odd number of blades produce twice as many rays as there are blades. For example, a 7-blade lens will create a 14-ray starburst, while a 6-blade lens will only produce a 6-ray starburst. To wrap it all together, remember that aperture as measured by f-stops is one part of the exposure triangle, along with shutter speed and ISO. Together they determine the overall exposure of your image. and more about that in my future videos. If you widen your aperture or lower the f-stop, you let in more light and might need a faster shutter speed to avoid overexposure, provided that your ISO stays the same. In low light situations, opening up your aperture can make all the difference in achieving a clear shot. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and please consider subscribing for more photography tips. Happy shooting! Goodbye!